So glad to have you here. If you're joining us new, there's reading schedules available in the foyer. It's also available in the weekly email bulletin that's sent out. You can link to that. It has the whole year's worth there. Just this month is out in the foyer. And we are encouraging you, of course, to ask the question, what is important to God as you're going through this? And also that you're journaling, writing down your thoughts and questions and as you're reading through. So if you need another journal, there's some extras up here. And hopefully you will take advantage of that. It does something different to crystallize your thinking when you're writing things down. So this last week, all of our readings were in the book of Proverbs. First 22 chapters, which prompts the question, what is a proverb? Or, if you wanted to pronounce it, I haven't heard anybody, a proverb. How many of you get the Christian Chronicle? Did you open it this week? Did you see this? I think a proverb is a verb that got really good at verbing and turned pro, no longer an amateur. I thought, well, that's appropriate. It's going in the slide presentation. But it is cute. But it does bring us back to the question, what is a proverb? Something generally true, okay? Emphasis on generally, okay? It's not an axiom, okay? Define axiom? Always true. Dr. Kelsey used to call that altruistic statement. I remember, okay, that axiom, okay? What's a proverb? A projection of the truth, okay? A principle? A wise saying. And part of wisdom is knowing when to apply and when not to apply. Yeah? John? Okay. Truth discovered, not something usually written by a young person. Okay. Okay. There's something involved about they observe life, is what you're saying. Ben Franklin, others, that they observe things and they realize a pattern, and so they kind of express this pattern. So generally true, not always true, may not apply every time, but most of the time, this is what's going to happen. Compacted truth. Oh, I like that. Uh-huh. Okay. Yeah, compacted truth. I almost think of kind of the punchline of a joke. You know, if you're with somebody and you all know the joke, all you have to say is the punchline and everybody gets it. And the person that doesn't know the joke is going, what? That kind of thing. Well, I did some research. This is the definition from dictionary.com. A short, popular saying, usually of unknown and ancient origin, that expresses effectively some commonplace truth or useful thought. Adage, I don't understand Saul, but a wise saying, precept. The fourth definition is the one that caught me. A profound saying, maxim, or oracle utterance requiring interpretation. like a worldly proverb doesn't require interpretation? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and part of the wisdom is knowing when to apply which one, even in worldly proverbs. So, as you were reading, the first 10 chapters or so were about wisdom and folly and seeking wisdom and Solomon encouraging his son. And then in about chapter 10, we start having the wisdom of Solomon. Did anybody count the Proverbs? I didn't either. I ran across one of my old notes that said that there's 350 Proverbs from chapter 10 through 22:16. 350 Proverbs of Solomon. He wrote 3,000. Why are some of them repeated? Did they not have any of the other 2,700 to choose from? I don't have an answer to that. But there's 350 of them there, and some of them are repeated, aren't they? Hope so. Yeah, make a point. This one's really good. So, maybe. Don't have an answer. So, as you were reading, what are some of the ones that stood out to you? Which ones did you like? Did you have questions about? Did you not understand? Did you think, oh, this is really good? What ones were important to God? Yes? That one usually pops up. It's such a contrast in pictures, isn't it? If you've not been around a farm, my grandfather raised some pigs lots of times, and I mean it's just a nasty pen. It smells bad, and there were certain one of the hogs that we had to put rings in, and the reason my grandfather put the ring in the pig's nose was because they're rooting and digging, and they're getting close, and so they're doing too much of that and going to dig their way out of the pen. So you put a ring in their nose that hurts when they start trying to root. So they quit doing all that. None of them were gold. Just an interesting picture. Any questions about that? I got one. I thought pigs were unclean animals. What were they doing with pigs? Anyway, I thought the same thing in one of the scenes of The Chosen. They're in Jerusalem and there are pigs running around. I'm going, could be. I don't have an answer. It's just one of those like, okay. Debbie, you had one or something. Mm-hmm. There seems to be a whole lot about not speaking a lot and listening, and it's obvious some of the sayings in James come directly out of Proverbs. So, yeah, he knew that book pretty well. And he kind of writes in that same style, doesn't he? Mm-hmm. Guard your lips, guard your soul. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The verbal transmission of information is pretty foreign to us in our culture and in our world today because recording stuff and writing stuff we do that all the time. In fact, even in a lot of our business circles, if it's not written down, it didn't happen. That is not true in the ancient cultures. It was very, very verbal, and the office, if you will, of storyteller is one that you had to learn how to tell the story and tell it exactly right every time. So, yeah, it was a very verbal, and it's much easier to remember that stuff in short bites than long stories. And like yes. Mm-hmm. We seem to remember those very well. Our brains work that way where we see a vivid picture of it. John? Okay. Pro or con? Against having an affair, yes, okay. Yeah. You brought it up, man. Yeah. Practical advice, not necessarily in keeping with God's word. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Solomon says a lot, and it's in a lot of the Proverbs that, especially in the first 10, is wisdom and understanding and knowledge. This is beyond financial gain. That financial gain will come as if you apply this, but if you run after the financial stuff, you're not only going to not have the financial stuff, you're not going to enjoy life. It's going to go bad for you. So yeah, don't seek wisdom. Seek understanding. That's what you want to go for. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they do. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And as Paul wrote, we still are at war with our flesh, with our desires, personal desires. Yeah. Which may somehow tie into his thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've always heard that's a Hebrew expression of, yeah, there's 9 things to do, 10 that I'm going to get done. But yeah, those are good things to avoid. Well, let me tell you about one of mine. I have liked, enjoyed 17, the last verse of chapter 17, verse 28. The first time I remember running across this, I was a grade school student, so we were studying maybe 5th or 6th grade. And it's the one that says, even a fool who keeps silent is considered wise. When he closes his lips, he is deemed intelligent. I was a curious child, so I thought, I wonder if this would work in school. So if I knew the answer, like, yeah, I'll tell you the answer. If I didn't know the answer, I would just sit there and look bored, like I knew the answer, but I had no clue. But I didn't spout what I didn't know. Everybody started thinking I knew all the answers. No, I just kept my mouth shut when I didn't know them. It works. Not all the time, but generally, it works. Yes. Uh-huh. Yeah. Chapter 3, starting verse 5. I want to repeat because not everybody can hear and on the tape. Trust in the Lord and acknowledge him in all your ways. Yeah. Yeah. Did any of you notice what was going on in chapter 9? In chapter 9, as Solomon is bringing this thing, his encouragement of a son, anybody that would follow him, to gain wisdom and understanding, there is the personification of wisdom and folly. I may have noticed this before, but it caught my eye this time for sure. Did you notice that both wisdom and folly are spoken of as being on the street corner, and they both call out the same thing? And they're female, but they're both calling out the same thing of, whoever is simple, let him turn in here. To him who lacks sense, she says. Now they say different things, but both of them are introducing the same thing. How do you tell your children which voice to listen to? How do you know which voice to listen to? Sometimes the hard way. What's that modern proverb? Good judgment comes from experience. Experience comes from bad judgment. Yeah, sometimes experience. One of the things I tried to teach my children was experience is really the only teacher. But experience doesn't have to be your own. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Verbal things are not as well remembered as things that are written down. Exactly. Yeah. So be careful what you write down and send out on your phone or messages. Yeah. People have learned that the hard way, haven't they? And some. Yes. Doesn't listen to everything. Yeah, Solomon said some good things, but then did he really follow all of his own advice? No. And not, and losing it in some ways. Yeah, we haven't read about that yet. It's coming this week. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does make Solomon human, like us. Um, I think I'm not sure about this, but I think part of that has to relate with the culture and the age difference between men and women. Uh, the men were typically 30 years old before they got married, and the wives were not. And so most sons wound up caring for their widowed mothers. And so you, just like in the case of, as an example, Joseph and Mary, we see Mary still alive in Jesus' time, but we hear nothing of Joseph. So a wise son will take care of his mother because he's done things right, because dad isn't around anymore. Somebody over here? Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anything else stand out to you? Any other favorites? Yes. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. A lot of proverbs, several proverbs about sharing your wealth, not holding on to stuff with a tight hand, and especially things about not depriving your workers of their wages or delaying in paying them. There was another one that just struck me as one of the images, chapter 18, verse 6. A fool's lips walk into a fight, and his mouth invites a beating. Yeah, I can see that happening. Rod?
I was thinking about the contrast of other, like in Lamentations, where it's pretty common to be like asking God to do terrible things to your enemies. To in this book, there's several places, and I think it reveals in God's character of wanting a reconciliation with everybody, to not delight in other people's
Yes.
miseries or mock them. So
Yes, there are several proverbs about not delighting in your enemy's downfall, lest, if I remember right, it's lest the Lord turn away from his wrath. So, which includes in it the concept of you don't save yourself by your own hand, but the Lord has vengeance. There's one phrase that I've heard probably more sermons on out of the book of Proverbs And it's Proverbs 1 and verse 7, talking about the fear of the Lord. And the fear of the Lord is what? The beginning of wisdom, or the beginning of knowledge. Both are right. I did a quick word search, but before we get into that, what is the fear? What is fear? What is talked about here? What does that mean? There is an element of that. Pardon? A respect. There's that. What scares you? Some of you, it might be snakes. Some of it might be spiders. What's that first reaction when you see them? No, it's completely involuntary. You can't help but do it, right? For some of you, it might be looking over the edge of a building or over a cliff. That way your stomach just turns and you can't do a thing about it. Especially if you're going along and all of a sudden there's a wall and all of a sudden it's glass and you look over and, oh, that's a long ways down. And you involuntarily take a step away from it, right? I went up and looked at this Hebrew word, that fear. And it is fear or terror. And think back about how the Israelites reacted when Yahweh descended on Mount Sinai. And it was, if you've been close to a supercell, and all the winds and the darkness and the lightning and the sound and the thunder and all that happening, and it's right there, how nervous do you get? It's scary. I think part of this has to be that this God that we serve is not common. And he loves us and he wants us to approach him. But he's dangerous. And choosing the wrong path puts us on the wrong side of God. And so if you are scared of the punishment that could be inflicted, that's a place to start on your journey to wisdom and to knowledge. Not that you need to run away in terror, but understand this is not safe or common. I would guess, and I'm pretty sure that there's not a one of you that is afraid to flip on a light switch or flip it off, to turn it off and on. But if we took the faceplate off and we had that switch sitting out and just kind of dangling out there, not very many of you are willing to go over there and turn it off with those bare connections hanging out there. And that's only 110 volts. It'll surprise you. It won't kill you. It'll hurt, but it won't kill you. I'm not so sure about 220 volts. I don't mess with that. Nobody would turn the switches. I took a tour of Thomas Edison's factory. I have a picture. There is, completely accessible to the public, right by one of the doors that you walk out, there is a heavy wire that is taped with the old cloth electrical tape. If you're old enough to know what that is. It's not plastic, it's a gummy cloth. The tag on that wire says 220 volt. No, excuse me, I think it may say 440 volt. Anyway, I don't know how long it's been there, but I can't tell that anybody has touched it in decades. Nobody left to tell the story. Could be. I did an illustration with the youth group one time where I took an extension cord and took one end of it off and left bare wires and asked somebody to come up and play with it and move it around, and they were fine. And I said, okay, and you're comfortable with it? Oh, yeah, I am. And I took the other end and plugged it in. All of a sudden, they did not want to swing it around, and all. Now, the other end was not connected, but they didn't know that. I'm not being dangerous with them. But it was all of a sudden, wait a minute, these are now live. This is not common. So I think that is the point I want to make. This is a beginning point that the fear of the Lord is a beginning of knowledge in 1 and verse 7. But it's also a hatred of what is evil. If you are fearing the Lord, you're going to hate what is wrong. In 9 and verse 10, it is the beginning of wisdom. How do you apply the knowledge that you have? In chapter 14, the fear of the Lord is a fountain of life. That's another interesting word study to do sometime, is just read through the Bible where it talks about life. From the garden to heaven in Revelation 22. Life. And finally in 15 and 33, it is instruction in wisdom. There's several other phrases where the fear of the Lord is used. 9 others, I think. In Proverbs, they hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of the Lord. Chapter 2, where he's talking about if you're seeking wisdom and understanding and insight, and by storing up the commandments in your heart, he says, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. If you store up his commands and then you look for it, you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. Chapter 10, it prolongs life. In chapter 14, in the fear of the Lord, one has strong confidence. Chapter 15, better is a little with the fear of the Lord than great treasure and trouble. Chapter 16, by the fear of the Lord, one turns away from evil. Chapter 19, the fear of the Lord leads to life. Another one of those life passages. In chapter 23, which, let not your heart envy sinners, but continue in the fear of the Lord all the day. Sometimes we can look at sinners and see, as Solomon's writings say in places, that why are they prospering? You know, that looks pretty good. I'd like to prosper. Maybe I need to be like them. No. Don't envy their way. Yes.
One end of the pendulum to the other. I was thinking about how love plays into this. Because yes, we do need to have a healthy fear of the Lord. I was talking to Roger beforehand. When someone comes into the presence of God in Scripture, they fall down on their face. I mean, there's a trembling. And And I think we've lost some of that reverence. But on the other side of it, if you only talk about the fear of the Lord and you don't talk about the love of the Lord, I mean, how many sermons have you heard, hellfire and brimstone, where you're just trying to literally scare the hell out of people? Right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, literally.
Yes.
And so I think to fear the Lord is something we need to be teaching, maybe we've gotten away from, but we also need to understand that when you approach the throne of grace, you can do it with confidence. And so it's usually either one or the other. It's like God is this big puppy dog and loves you the way you are, nothing matters, or it's God's got these lightning bolts, and if you do one thing wrong, you're going to get struck. It's hard to find that middle ground. So maybe you start with fear. Like sometimes you got to tell your child, don't touch the stove, it's hot, before they can even reason what hot really is, you know. But so that's hard for me. Yes, I understand the fear of the Lord, but I think it's incomplete to just stay there.
Yeah. I would agree with that. We do tend to swing in that pendulum, and either extreme is wrong without the other. Yeah.
When in Exodus 33 and 34, when God said he would say his name in front of Moses and he was going to hide him in the cleft of the rock, and he did that, and what he said was, I'm compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in love, maintaining love to thousands, yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If you're on the guilt side, it is a frightening thing. But if you're on the redeemed side, it's marvelous. And
The law tells you what side of it you're on and whether you're breaking it.
mm-hmm.
The law is good at pointing out sin. It doesn't really tell us what to do when we need redemption from it. So.
No. So there's just a lot of practical advice bound up in this. And I would encourage you to take and to study these and to look through them. One of the ideas to do is there's 31 chapters in Proverbs. As you have time, go back and take a month and read just one chapter a day, not 3 chapters a day like we're doing, and pick out your favorite proverb out of that chapter and think about that. One of the things you're going to read starting this today, this next week, is the 30 sayings of Agur. I guess that's how you pronounce it. I have taken a month, written each one of those 30 sayings down on an individual card and carried that and tried to memorize that saying that day. And it's amazing when you do that, not just with Proverbs, but with Scripture in general. When you start working to memorize and ingrain that and seek those commandments and store them up in your heart, how often life brings them to remembrance. All of a sudden you go, oh, I've done the same thing with the Sermon on the Mount. How often it applies to what I'm doing as I walk through the life. But if I don't store that up, I don't have the access. So I encourage you to do this, to read through it. Any others you want to bring up real quick or comments? John?
I just have a comment. When I was reading through Proverbs, it occurred to me, I was trying to think, what's important to God? Well, what's important to God is that my well-being, my well-being for my future, that I don't make these errors, that I don't run off the cliff, that I don't touch the hot stove, those kinds of things. So to me, it was a type of thing where overall the Proverbs are about, here's some things you should know, here's what's going to happen if you ignore it, here's what's going to happen if you put them in your life. I felt like that was pretty much the summary of all of the Proverbs.
Mm-hmm. Good summary statement. So what's important to God in Proverbs is, I want you to have a good life. I I want you to enjoy life and do well, and here's things to do, and here's things to avoid. Good point. Yes.
Fear is tied to the unknown. Some people will fear things that other people don't. And it has to do with what they know about the outcome or what they fear about the possibilities of the outcome, or not even knowing what the possibilities of the outcome would be. For instance, you could have somebody who's very skilled at climbing mountains. They can do it freehand. They don't seem to have the fear to do that because they have skill and knowledge over what the possible outcomes could be. And then with that skill and knowledge gives them confidence over what the outcome would be, even if they don't know, what it would feel like to hit the bottom, right? But another person who doesn't have that skill or that knowledge or that wisdom of the outcome of what they're doing, what they're going through their life, whether it's climbing a mountain or on a tightrope or standing at the edge of the building, face to face with a snake. They don't really know how to perceive that and how to walk through life. Like, for instance, if somebody really has good knowledge of the scripture and feels very confident in the word of the Lord, they won't fear so much dying because they know what the outcome's going to be, or they feel more confident in the outcome, and that they have done something, they have developed a skill, they've developed the knowledge to help them with that possible unknown outcome. So when you remove the unknown part of it, it makes it a lot easier to go through life with confidence.
I think you're right. I think we do tend to fear the unknown, and that God is saying in this, God, you don't know what tomorrow holds, but I do. Trust me, I got you. And I think that's good. So this next week we'll be reading, finishing up Proverbs. We'll read Song of Solomon, Ecclesiastes, 4 chapters in Kings, about 5 chapters, 4 or 5 chapters in 2nd Chronicles. Again, thank you for being here. Thank you for your comments. Wait a minute. No class next week. Well, this is what you're going to be reading next week. We won't have class. But anyway, didn't read on beyond that. So, all right. Thank you for being here. Go rescue some teachers.